Red Bull seems to have already lost their patience with Sergio Perez, and with so many drivers waiting to snatch his place and prove that they're the next big thing in Formula 1, it seems like the 33-year-old's tenure with the Austrian team is nearing an end. After Marko and Horner took a defensive stance on Perez's contractual situation in 2024 a couple of weeks ago, it seemed like there was no room for discussion, but their sudden change of minds has shocked the entire world. Has the 2023 season been the last nail in the coffin for Perez's career at Red Bull? And if so, who would be the best replacement for the Mexican driver? When the 2023 season started, it was obvious that Verstappen and Perez would have had a bit of a tussle in the first couple of races. Mostly because they're street venues, and we know for a fact that Perez tends to be brilliant on those types of circuits. And the facts said it all. He won in Jeddah and Baku, and entering Miami, he had a 6-point deficit to Verstappen for the championship lead. To top that off, he started on pole in this race while Verstappen was 9th, and the fact that Perez still lost the lead and the race in the very early stages due to a pure lack of performance was truly a heartbreaker for him. So ever since Miami passed, we weren't able to see the 33-year-old shine in his brightest lights. The only reason why he did not lose the second spot in the Drivers' Championship and is still holding a 30-point difference compared to Hamilton is because the grid beneath him has been just as volatile as himself. So having the best car can definitely take you out of unwanted situations very quickly. But missing out on 5 straight Q3 appearances and making the podium only once in these occasions in Austria is not what Red Bull wanted to see, and even in Perez's father's words, Antonio, the veteran driver, was brought to be the number 2 in Red Bull, and he's not doing that job very well at this moment. Yep, he's second place driver in the championship, and he was a vital part of Red Bull securing the Constructors' Championship so early in the season. But if we take Verstappen, for example, he single-handedly has a 107-point lead over the second place team of Mercedes. Considering how consistent he is, you'd think that Red Bull might not even need a second driver at this point, but with their headaches being caused by Perez and his inconsistency, as well as the new ownership having a different direction with how the team is going to be led, is there anything that Perez should be afraid of, especially after Horner and Marko's latest statements? The Qatar GP has gone on to show how inconsistent Perez is yet again, and during Friday's qualifying session he exited in Q2 and failed to make yet another Q3 appearance, which only compromises his race to a further extent. To add salt to the wound, he started the sprint race at P8 behind Hülkenberg and was involved in a crash and had to start the race from the pit lane. I know that finishing P10 might sound like a good recovery race after being dead last at the beginning of the race, but if you compare his pace to Russell's, who was involved in a heavy crash in turn 1, then changed several paths in the pit stop and finished 4th, I guess there are no excuses for Perez's lack of performance. And yeah, I forgot to mention that he had 2 5-second penalties for exceeding track limits, which are gained after you cross the white lines for the 4th time during the race. For comparison, Verstappen crossed the white lines 0 times, so let that sink in as a fact. And Red Bull has finally started to realise that, slowly but surely, Perez has started to become a liability. A prime example of that can be found in the performances of the McLaren, Ferrari and Mercedes drivers, and with similar cars, all of them are finishing very close to each other, and the margins in the Drivers' Championships are not as huge as the one with Verstappen and Perez. Of course, nobody expects Perez to be battling the 3-time world champion, given the fact he's in a world of his own, but having a 209-point deficit to your teammate is just absolutely unacceptable, especially after the 3rd place driver Hamilton is just 30 points behind you for the P2 fight in the Drivers' Championship. And just like I mentioned earlier in this video, Red Bull is no longer taking a defensive stance on Perez's contractual situation for 2024. Yes, he does have a contract, but we know for a fact that means absolutely nothing to the Austrian team, as we saw how they treated Nick de Vries after just 10 races of underperformance. Buying Perez out of his contract is now more than a realistic scenario, considering the fact that his father has also turned against the team and stated that it's impossible for his son to compete for the championship because the car that the Austrian outlet builds is always tailor-made towards his teammate Verstappen. Christian Horner was visibly upset with Perez after his performance in Qatar, and when talking about this, the Brit went on to say, I think we need to talk to Perez to understand what happened. We know what he's capable of and he's not hitting that form at the moment. We desperately need him to find that form to keep this second place in the championship. It's frustrating that he's only come out of the weekend with 1 point. Even starting from the back of the grid, there was an opportunity to score heavily or decently. Up until this point, Red Bull has never used the word desperately for anything that happened in 2023, which could only go to show that they're on the verge of breaking the contractual terms with Perez if he fails to show up more consistently in the remainder of 2023 and in the beginning of next year. This is something Helmut Marko has also elaborated on, as Red Bull's special advisor went on to say, the gap between Perez and Verstappen is simply too big at the moment because second place in the World Championship is also at risk now. Perez needs to get out of this negative spiral. Sure, there have been some fast laps, but what's the point if you're getting penalties all the time? We generally try to honour existing contracts, but it's up to Perez to prove that he deserves it. But then we have 3 relatively good drivers in AlphaTauri. Let's see how things develop, but we expect Checo to rediscover his old form. So there is one elephant in the room that we need to address: the replacement for Perez. There have been rumours about Daniel Ricciardo stepping in as soon as the middle of 2024 if the 33-year-old continues with his inconsistency. But we must not forget that there are 2 young drivers, Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson, who've been nothing short of phenomenal for AlphaTauri so far, as Lawson has managed to outperform his teammate 3 times to 1 in the 4 races that Tsunoda and Lawson crossed the checkered flag. Furthermore, the New Zealander stands as the highest finishing driver for AlphaTauri, P9, in Singapore, in a race in which he competed for the first time in his career. Make no mistake, Red Bull are definitely ready to pull the trigger on Perez, but so far it seems like Ricciardo has been the most viable option because there was literally no other way he could have accepted the role in AlphaTauri in the middle of the season. There were a couple of other options for him, such as Haas and Williams, with both of them being much more competitive outlets than the Italian team. But as Ricciardo said, his goal is to retire with Red Bull, and the Austrian team made sure that they put him on a greater mission before he gets that luxury fulfilled. The initial stance of Horner was that Ricciardo's first chance of replacing Perez would be in 2025, but after the last couple of races from the Mexican driver, it became evident that this opportunity might come a lot sooner. After all, they made the same move with De Vries, and when asked why they didn't give him a couple more races, or at least a full season, Marko replied, "What would a couple more races change when we know the outcome of the entire saga?" That can definitely be applied to the current situation in Red Bull, and while Norris has also been mentioned as one of the preferred drivers from Red Bull's new ownership, that's very unlikely to happen as the Brit already put his focus on McLaren beyond 2025. But one thing is for sure, the new owners of Red Bull, as well as Liberty Media, want 2 competitive drivers in the Austrian team, and while Ricciardo might be the first step towards this happening, I guess we're going to experience a lot of change in Red Bull's drivers lineup to see this scenario being realised in the first place. In all of the cases, Perez's current performance doesn't justify his seat in Red Bull, and for all we know, it seems like he's run out of excuses. Do you think Perez will be replaced by Ricciardo in the middle of 2024? Let us know in the comments below.